Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. Please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Michael Ramsey, who is the VP of Product Management for Customer Workflow Products at ServiceNow. That is a mouthful, and Michael will explain to us what that all means. But first and foremost, Michael, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Adrian.
Glad to be here. Now, maybe you can explain what that all means. Product management for customer workflow products. I mean, I'm getting my tongue tied in knots again. So maybe for the benefit of our listeners and also the people that read the highlights and that aren't familiar with the title and the work and ServiceNow and things, can you tell us a bit about you and also the work that you do?
Sure. I think I can help with that.
Thank you.
So first off, for those who don't know ServiceNow, we like to say that we're a cloud company that makes work better for people. So we focus on what we call digital workflows in the enterprise. So delivering a better experience to employees and to customers. And we work with roughly 80% of the Fortune 500. So we do a lot of work, in the large enterprise. And when we talk about customer workflows, we're talking about customer service. So
right.
Solutions for customer service organizations, and then also what we call customer operations. So the operations behind the products and services that you deliver to your customers.
Right. And so thank you for that. That sort of makes it a lot clearer. Maybe the challenge is going to be coming up with a shorter title. And maybe that's going to fit the challenge for 21. Maybe we can do it by the end of this conversation. Who knows? Maybe we can rename your job into something kind of like, maybe it's going to be around kind of sorting out the messy middle, which is kind of the rationale for our conversation today, because that's what, when we were preparing this, that's the big theme that came out, is that you said you believe that many organizations are grappling with this idea of a messy middle in customer service. And I thought that was intriguing and worth exploring. So can you explain to me what it is you mean by that, and what the sort of the challenge and the cost of it all is?
For sure. Let me kind of start by, and I will get to what we mean by messy middle. But I think first we have to start with customer service is focused a lot on customer engagement. And that's obviously important. And that's been a huge emphasis. I think, frankly, there's been progress. Right? We've been taking consumer-like experience and bringing those to customer service, whether it's native mobile apps, mobile messaging, chatbots, all of this stuff, which is important. But what the messy middle is focused on is when the customer has a question or a problem that can't be just answered by knowledge, or it's not in an FAQ, and it's not even something that customer service can directly solve by themselves. Right. It's where there's somebody in the middle office or back office, some other team that has to do something for the customer to solve their problem or resolve an issue. And that middle can often be messy. So
Right.
oftentimes you find that the teams and the people that have to do those things for the customer, they're connected with manual process. There's email, there's usually spreadsheets. It's not automated, and so that can lead to a very poor customer experience, no matter how good the actual engagement is, how good the mobile app is.
Right.
And it may be helpful. Like I can give you a personal anecdote actually from last week.
Well, sure. You just took the words out of my mouth. I was about to say, like, Michael, give me an example of what this is, because then we'll be like, oh, that. Yeah, and I'll get that.
Yes. So one of the banks that I use, where I have a checking account and a credit card, I was out and had a transaction that got declined, and
Right.
I happen to have a very nice mobile app from this bank. I opened it up. I got to use the little embedded chat bot, but I couldn't figure out what was wrong.
Right.
I had my credit limit. It wasn't obvious. I escalated to chat, so I was chatting with a human at that point. But that person in customer service, even though they were great, they were empathetic, they were friendly to talk to, they couldn't figure out what the problem was or solve it.
Right.
And it turned out it actually took over a day to kind of work through and get handed off to a fraud department, and then get handed off to a credit card services team. And we eventually got it resolved. But in the meantime, I had additional, declined transactions. And that's just kind of a little example of what we're talking about in terms of this messy middle.
Right. Okay. And is that something that you think kind of also, well, just potentially affects all firms of all ages and in all sectors? I mean, because it just makes me think about, people talk about digitally native firms and versus legacy and more traditional sort of firms. I mean, is it something that affects all firms?
So I do think it goes essentially across industries and in sectors. When you think about digital native or younger companies who just implicitly have more modern technology, oftentimes they're smaller. There may be less of an impact. The middle is smaller. It may be less messy. But we do run across this across industries and even across age of firms. You do tend to find this in the large enterprise, in more mature industries. It's a bigger problem.
Right. And given what we've gone through in the last few months, I mean, has the pandemic and our move to remote sort of working actually shone a greater light on this issue? And therefore, if it's true, has that shown up in terms of what firms are actually doing about it?
So, I mean, you bring up a very good point. I mean, the pandemic has changed things for everyone. And I think this whole problem of a messy middle in connecting your customer service with your operations has been exacerbated by the pandemic. So you have your customers, and whether it's a consumer or not, they're obviously working from home. Their behavior's different in many industries. There's been increased volume, increased demand, and so customer service specifically has had trouble responding to that and scaling with their own teams at home. And I think where that is amplified on the messy middle is that when you think of those, like my personal anecdote, the payment operations teams, the credit card operations teams, the fraud teams, they're also working at home.
Yeah.
And if their processes are manual and they're waiting on emails and these kind of disconnected workflow, that's only going to get worse. And obviously, if there's increased volume, it's just amplifying those problems.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that there is, there's kind of a glass half full, though, from the pandemic. As horrible and even tragic as it's been for many people, it's also just removed the barrier to change. Like there's, I don't know about you talking with customers and companies, but the companies that we work with, like it's no longer a question of, oh, we want to do this, but we just have to have the budget or the time or or align priorities, it's now an imperative.
Yeah.
And so I would say it's kind of a combination of those three things.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I would completely agree. I mean, it's not about, oh, like, how do you sequence things? It's just like get stuff done. I think there's also the thing about the messy middle, which is sometimes it's also, it's in my experience, it's also not just about, if you like, having access to the right sort of systems and so on and so forth, having to hand off, but also sometimes I remember having an experience where I think I might have been calling, funny enough, my bank, and I called and then got one person and then they couldn't quite help me. And I was like, unsatisfied, left it a little while, called again, had to wait for a while, just gave up and then called again and then got somebody else who was like, oh yeah, no, I had to fix that, because there was this variety of experience about how you can do the workaround because they've experienced it before. And I guess that also the knowledge part of it is, it would be a dimension in that messy middle as well.
For sure. And I agree with you. Like, this is not just a technology problem, right? These are people, these are organizations.
Yeah.
It's hard to change. And but I do think technology, even in your example there, has an important role to play.
Sure.
And it's just like customer engagement is still important. I didn't mean to minimize the importance of that. But if we can help, one, provide the capabilities, the visibility to what's happening to the customer, and they can, self-serve themselves, that's even better in many cases.
Yes.
But when it does get escalated to a human, and like your example there, where you talk to 3 different people and one person knew what to do and they could help you, and it's your bad luck that wasn't the first person. Why can't we give the tools to all 3 of those people?
Well, exactly, and which it sort of makes me think that actually, and this is one of the things I've been thinking about, is the rise of and the emergence of, and I guess the need for better enablement and also employee self-service kind of tools. Because if we don't reduce the delta across the different people and different sort of experiences and share that knowledge, then we almost inhibit our people and our people's ability to do the right thing and for the right reasons, for the customer who calls in that particular kind of time. So it's like it's quite a big domain, really.
Yes, completely agree. And like, that even goes back to like within the customer service industry, talking about happy agents, happy customers,
Sure.
and how the employee experience has a direct impact on the customer experience.
So to bring this all to life, Michael, I mean, can you, because I know this is something, it's not just this esoteric kind of concept. We go, it's a messy middle, and you point the finger at it and wish them well, as it were. This is something that you actually have been working on at ServiceNow to try and help people sort this out. So can you give me like a couple of examples, or 2, 3 examples of firms that you've seen that are responding to, I guess, to their very own messy middle, and what they've done and how they've benefited?
Definitely. Let me walk through 2 or 3 examples, and then as we go, you can chime in.
Sure.
Prod me. I'm going to stay within the financial services and banking industry for the first one. So we've been working with a UK-based bank, and specifically within their payment operations teams, which fit into what we would call the middle office. And one of the easy examples to think about, where they have automated and kind of solved this messy middle problem, was for a specific kind of payment, which was a dispute. So think of a small business, they're paying their bills, but they actually make a payment to the wrong account.
Right.
And they realize this, and you may think this doesn't happen very often, but this actually happens all the time, especially for a large bank. And the process, when this was a messy middle problem, was incredibly manual across multiple people on different teams to, one, figure out, can they stop the payment? If the payment's already gone through, can they reclaim it from the account that it shouldn't have gone to?
Sure.
And then redirect to where it should have gone. And so, and even one simple example was to kick off that whole payment dispute process. once the customer files a dispute, it took them 24 hours to even assign it to someone to do something about it, to even look into it.
Right.
So we were able to work with this bank and this team within the bank, and just by putting in automation across this payment dispute process, including assignment, they went from the same time it took to handle one dispute, they're now handling 1,500 at the same time. And so you can just purely from a time standpoint, regardless of the actual customer engagement, if it's through the phone or the mobile app or whatever, they're just solving the customer's problem much faster.
Cool. That's like, well, wow. That's like and one dispute would take what, a day or so to do, and now they're kind of doing 1,500 in a day. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. The time period, I don't have the details on the actual time period, but it was actually multiple days, and of course business days. So
right.
So if you happen to do this over a weekend or holiday or whatever, it was even longer.
Yeah.
It was even one day just to kick off the process, which was
and it's also work days and office hours, I guess.
Exactly. In that industry,
which makes things feel all that much longer when you're a customer waiting for something to happen.
Exactly. So so that's been an exciting customer to work with, and they have a whole slew of opportunities there, and we're really seeing progress there, and they're excited to go even faster. The next customer, that completely different industry, so I won't just give you banking examples. A large global brand, 7-Eleven, in the retail space. For those of your audience who have not gone to a 7-Eleven, it's a convenience store, oftentimes gas station. Mm-hmm. Before COVID, they had a very kind of manual process where they allowed customers who would come to their stores, and even employees within the stores or partners within the stores, could file complaints or issues with problems at the store. And this could range from kind of customer service type problems where it's cleanliness, or it could even be product related, like lack of inventory or displays, or a whole range of things. But once that happened, for them to actually respond and address it or fix it, or even respond to the customer or the employee that filed it, was completely manual, and it was very haphazard with how this happened. So we worked.
Are we talking about sort of like somebody does fill something in, and it fills a form in, and it sends an email to an inbox, and that how the speed and accuracy of response depends on who's manning the inbox?
Correct. And
yay, 21st century.
Yes. And again, it's the same idea. It's one, let's actually capture this, assign it to the right team to actually do something about it. And then it's automating the tasks involved to actually respond and then address it depending on what the problem was.
Okay.
And so this is something that they actually did this during the pandemic. So in many ways, even more challenging.
Yeah.
But it's another flavor, another industry. And if just in terms of pure outcomes, they were able to increase the resolution rate over 200%. And they were, the last time that I spoke with them, they were approaching 400,000 customer issues that they've resolved since they instituted.
Nice.
Which is roughly about 1,000 a day for them across their stores.
Wow. And how, I mean, this sounds like when you're talking, it sounds like there's particularly that example at 7-Eleven, it sounds like there's a combination of, one, really understanding the kind of the problem and where it needs to go and to who and why. And so there's an intelligent routing kind of bit. And then there seems to be a bit of a robotic, RPA kind of bit, per chance. But I don't know if that's accurate. I'm just guessing kind of here. I mean, how does it actually kind of work in terms of the technology? I mean, please don't go all ones and zeros on me, because that I'll just be stunned into silence. But well, just give me an idea of one of the tech that they're using, because there's like obviously kind of some advanced analytics and AI things in terms of the intelligence that's used to do this sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But also, what sort of level of, if you like, work that needs to get done to make all this to do almost the connective tissue in many ways?
Sure. So you've touched on some of the things, which is one, capturing the issue or the feedback, and automating how we route or assign that work to someone or a team. And then it's also, depending on what the problem is, different things need to happen. So there's, not everything has to be serial. Like you can have multiple tasks that could get assigned in parallel. So I would say it is, in some cases it is complex workflow. In some cases, yes, there's technology like, sentiment analysis to, identify more attributes about the request or the issue. But a lot of it is relatively straightforward, although in some cases complex workflow, making sure that there are tasks that need to get done. There's specific teams or people who can do them. And they have to happen in some cases in an order, in some cases they can happen in parallel.
And you had a third one that you wanted to share with us?
Yeah, sure. So then I wanted to share another different industry example, which would be in the public sector or the government space. So within the United States, one of the states in the United States is the state of Tennessee. And so we have worked with one of the departments there, which is the Department of Human Services. And you can imagine, I don't know about the reputation in the UK, but government has a reputation in the US as being slow, manual, paper-based. And what we worked with the state of Tennessee to do was to take processes like an application for services from the state Department of Human Services, digitize them so that whether they're coming in person to a office to get served in person, whether they're going to a website and having a digital experience across different channels, they can apply, they can process that application, and they can get their services. And oftentimes those services obviously have to go through, if we talk about the messy middle, many different groups and people. And when you think about the whole pandemic, and we've been talking about the COVID environment, government has been one of those industries where massive new volume coming in, whether it's just, I need to get services from the state. What happens now that COVID-19 is here? Can I go in person? How do I get those services? And so one of the examples that we worked with them on was a food assistance service. And so digitizing that whole process from application to receiving those services was something that we helped them automate and digitize so that they could do it in person where it required that, or where the citizen wanted that. But in many cases, especially with COVID, it was not in person, and making sure that they could still deliver those services.
Okay, that's cool. I mean, so broadly, if I was just going to ask you, like, think about those three examples, and I'm sure there's kind of many more, and think about how people are responding to that and what they're doing. I mean, what are the broad lessons you think can be drawn out from their experience, which sort of builds the case that we need to get stuck into this, because it's not just, otherwise we're just dealing with the surface.
Sure.
We have to go deeper.
Sure. I mean, I really think that the lessons are, one, that there are people and there are technology, and I think it's looking at the customer service and the customer experience through not only the lens of how am I engaging my customers or citizens or whatever it is, but then also what is the end-to-end experience? And if it goes beyond customer service, let's make sure that we connect customer service with the operations behind the products and services that my customers buy from me. And let's make sure that we can kind of stand in those customer shoes, and we can deliver a great experience. And it includes engagement, of course, but it's also, how do we automate? How do we provide the self-service capabilities? And then how do we provide the human assisted capabilities to answer their questions, to solve their problems? to return something, to buy something, whatever it is.
Okay. So now I don't know if it's like, I mean, this is just me thinking about this, but thinking of this whole issue about this messy middle idea, Michael, and because I wonder quite broadly on this, and I also kind of I try and think about things systemically, and it feels to me that there's this broader issue at play here where companies are talking about they want to conduct themselves in a way to be more customer centric, but it feels like they're organizing their way. They're not kind of conducting themselves in a way to remove, eliminate, or minimize this messy middle. I mean, I remember it makes me think about a conversation I had with a gentleman by the name of Professor John Seddon, he had this beautiful quote where he said, while many companies may be talking outside in, their systems are still not designed outside in. I paraphrase slightly. And he goes on to say that companies need to create a customer typology of demand and how you're going to respond to that, not an organizational typology of what you do with customer demand. I mean, do you think that's accurate? And actually what we're doing with this messy middle is almost covering up for a bigger issue, or am I sort of, is that out of order?
No, I think that's very consistent with the whole challenge of the messy middle, is right. That oftentimes this is related to what Professor Seddon is talking about, which is, companies, especially large companies who have evolved over time,
right?
They've optimized for internal priorities,
right?
And I almost think, like, I've been in this space a long time in terms of customer service, and you can even think of, before you talk about the messy middle and the challenges, outside of customer service, think about how customer service was optimized for customer service. And not for customers. And I think what we're doing, or at least what we're trying to work with customers on in terms of the messy middle, is we need to go beyond customer service. We need to address the rest of the company and the operations that are required to deliver, your products and services to your customers. And we need to kind of re-architect and address those as well.
Yeah, and I guess it's like a stepping stone to that point where organizations might want to get to, but because of previous investments and legacy systems and things, is that they can't get there like from here right away, or it's hard to do that. And so what you're doing is saying, oh, actually, can we architect and orient our systems as they currently stand to respond more appropriately to a customer typology of demand, if you like, rather than actually just having to smash everything and kind of rebuild everything from scratch.
I think that's right. And I think, like, the way that we would describe that at ServiceNow would be that's why we talk about ourselves as a platform of platforms,
right?
That we need to provide solutions that work with your existing stack, your existing technology. You're not going to rip and replace everything and have a single, ivory tower solution that goes end to end. I also think, so technology is obviously part of it, and that's an exciting part for me as a software product manager. But the people piece that you brought up, and even Professor Seddon's comment, I think, is that there is that people aspect and the organizational structure aspect, and that oftentimes there's a customer service owner or executive who is usually not the same person who owns those operations teams behind the messy middle. So there's also aspects of that, and sometimes that is reflected in the technology decisions, right? There's different buyers for different technology that goes across those teams.
Yeah, I would suggest it probably goes further than that. It's almost a bit like it goes further all the way back to how we've experienced business through our life, and also how we've been educated about how businesses are organized and set up as well. And so there's a lot of stuff to, in many ways, unlearn to get to that kind of point and start thinking about things in a different way. But we have to, as you rightly say, we have to deal with where we're at, because we can't build this kind of ivory tower stack from scratch. I mean, however ideal and brilliant that might be, it's just not possible given where many large enterprises are.
Correct. And even I would say, Adrian, when there is a willingness to make change and maybe to consolidate and do some of those things, it's still going to take time. So
Yeah.
you still have to provide a roadmap to get there.
Perfect. So Michael, is there anything else you'd like to kind of add around or highlight that we've missed out about the messy kind of middle idea, and why it's important and why we need to start paying more attention to it and not just kind of like take a bit of a surface look on the, go beyond engagement, which is almost just the surface interactions, and think about things much more deeper when it comes to all the elements that impact a customer's experience, as it were. I mean, anything else you'd like to add or highlight that we might have missed out?
No, so I think we've explored a lot of ground there. I do think that, the more, even if you do sit in customer service and you are interested in, trying to deliver customer outcomes, you have to do this. Like you have to be able to, look outside in. You've got to be able to see, how you deliver that engagement experience that you want for your customers. And then how do you do the work on behalf of them to connect the middle and back office so that they can have the experience they want.
And so if they wanted to kind of start, because Michael, you say they have to do this, but I guess what they have to do is they almost have to have that light bulb moment where they have to be able to go and see it in many ways and almost experience it for themselves. I mean, where's the best place to start with something like that?
So I think there's been a lot of effort in this space in terms of focus on CX, the kind of conversations that you foster, have been happening in the industry.
Too long.
It's true. And I think there's been progress, but it almost feels to me like oftentimes it's the difference between tactical and strategic, where you're solving the problems you control.
Yes.
And you're shadowing your customers, you're surveying them, you're trying to solve these problems, but it's got to be holistic. It's got to be end to end. And oftentimes, like you pointed out, a single person or a single org doesn't control all those things. So it's one of those where change agents are important, and you should control what you control. But then you also do need to sell it. And I think there's an aspect of you need top-down buy-in. You need the C-suite to buy in. But I'm really encouraged about taking advantage of kind of tragic circumstances like the pandemic as change agents. And then at least for us, the C-suite does care. CEOs, COOs, they care about the customer experience, and they know how critical it is to their business. And in many ways, they're being disrupted. And the whole digital transformation imperative is because in many cases companies can't survive if they don't. And so I think these change agents actually, the doors are open if they knock on them. But you've got to think end to end. You've got to think of it from the customer's perspective of what they need to do with the company, with the brand. And I think it's a great opportunity.
Perfect. So if we kind of switch focus a little bit, because we're talking about the now, as it were, and sort of trying to make the now kind of better. I mean, if I ask you to, you're working in a software business platforms, you're working with 80% of the Fortune 500 companies. So you've got a lot of exposure to a lot of different companies, and also kind of where you're thinking about technology and what the future service and experience might look like. I mean, what is it? What do you, from your perspective, what does it look like? And what do you think are some of the key challenges that you believe lie ahead?
So I do think that the trends that have already been in place, that we've all been talking about actually for a number of years in terms of self-service, automation, these consumer grade experiences, which, continue to evolve, super fast. That that will continue to be exciting, and we can't even predict what's going to happen just a few years from now.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a democratization of that technology and those solutions that to me it's only one way.
Yeah.
And so that's super exciting to me. But I do think that there's also, it feels like even in the last year, this whole focus on direct to consumer and, in some cases, new business models, that to me, that's just going to accelerate. And to me, I'm optimistic. I think it's going to really lead to better and better experiences. And they're not, it doesn't mean that, the human element fades away. It's still going to be really important. I still want the ability to escalate or, proactively be escalated to a human where it makes sense.
Sure.
But I think that's the exciting part to me.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, no, I think that I would agree. I mean, and it's been the perennial challenge for a number of years is how to strike the right balance between technology and the human touch, I guess, and that will continue to be the challenge. But if I was to say to you, sorry, you were going to say?
Yeah, sorry, Adrian. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think another aspect of that, which is kind of exciting to me as well, is how businesses can deliver kind of a proactive service experience, which may or may not impact the customer directly.
Yeah.
Where we see that often today with digital products and services, and I think that part of us trying to tie together customer service with the operations, that does make it possible to deliver those end-to-end experiences to where you can proactively engage a customer and implicitly help them or explicitly help them. And I do think that is not just a demo. That's much more real as we move forward. And it's going to be digital products and services, but there will also be physical products and services that we can also do that more and more.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been banging on about proactive service for, I don't really want to count the years. I think it's up more than 7. It's nearly 8 years now, and it wasn't new when I was started to talk about it, as it were. And it's like the technology has been in place for a while to facilitate it, but it's only getting kind of better. But it's now becoming more of a thing that people are starting to embrace because they can really see the benefits of it, both from a customer engagement perspective and the experience perspective, but also from a business perspective in terms of how it manages and utilizes its resources and the loads on its resources.
Yeah.
So if it comes, then thank goodness. And why don't you hurry up? Is all I'll say about that. So, Michael, if I was to boil it down a little bit and say to you, so if someone listening into this or reading the highlights and they're like, that's all very well, but I'm in the weeds, right? I'm battling things, lots of different priorities, kind of every single day. But they want to make a start on improving their service experience. From your perspective and your experience, where's the best place for them to start?
So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I still think like they have to start from the customer and really putting themselves in the customer's shoes and the experience that customer has. And oftentimes we talk about this in terms of customer journeys, from the first interaction with a brand or company, all the way through to becoming a customer and hopefully becoming a bigger customer over time.
Yeah.
But I really hear what you're saying, because I do interact with a lot of people who are not CEOs, they can't snap their fingers and make change happen. But I still think that if they're really presenting the customer's perspective and the actual experience that they have with real examples, they can highlight these areas like the challenges in the messy middle, which they probably don't control.
Yes.
But like, I think that part of getting the right to solve problems is you kind of have to do the marketing internally. You have to actually be able to articulate what the problem is, why you think it's a problem, what you think the solution is, even if you don't control it. And I'm super encouraged because I do see that happen. and I, I still think that even if you don't have, all of the keys, you can still be part of the problem, and you can be a change agent.
Yeah, I really like that idea. Like, you have to do the marketing internally. That's very sage advice, because that's the reality, right? You might identify something, and it might be, there's a problem which is, I don't know, upstream or downstream from you, where or laterally, and some people don't see that it's causing a problem. So you have to make people aware of that. And I think when people become aware of it, then you can actually start to have a conversation about, well, why does this matter, and what are we going to do about it? And so the idea of marketing it internally is, I guess, an invitation to a conversation to do something different.
Yep. Yeah. And I think if you're doing that, from a customer perspective, and you're preaching the customer experience, it's very hard to argue against that.
No, sure.
Pretty compelling.
Word of advice: try not to make people very wrong, kind of very publicly. That's not going to be a good tactic.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's another area that I've learned over my career, that it's okay if you get someone to do what you think they should do and they think it's their idea. That's okay.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So thank you for that, Michael. That's great. I mean, one final thing I wanted to ask you, and this is part of I feel like a piece of ongoing social research I've been doing, because I've been polling everybody I've been talking to on on the podcast, since I published Punk CX, which is back from the summer of 2019. But I've been asking them about their view on what a punk approach to sort of customer experience would be, or what kind of sort of company or brand they think epitomizes more of a punk approach. Now, there's no right or wrong answers of this, but they're just like almost like word association questions. So if I was to ask you two questions, the first one being, what one or two words, say, would you use to describe a punk approach to customer experience? What would it be, or what would they be?
Now the tough questions.
No.
I I really like the idea of some of what we just talked about, and maybe risk taking is one way to talk about it, which is like, you can't be afraid to change something, to try something. And I think if you're doing that in the spirit of doing this for the customer, that might be a punk CX approach.
Cool. And does a company or brand come to mind that you think epitomizes that sort of ethos, or like a punk ethos, even more broader than, say, risk taking, but just you think actually they're quite punk?
That's a tough one. I would say there's a customer in the healthcare space that we work with a lot within my team, which is a company called Honor Health, which runs a bunch of facilities in the state of Arizona in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not sound on the surface like, well, healthcare doesn't sound very punk, but they really kind of have that ethos of, let's really make things better. Let's act fast. Let's not just talk about it. And I'm trying to think, there are lots of examples, and they have some really compelling people that we work with there. But one of the things that they did relatively recently was institute a new nurse line that was getting strained by calls, and so they said, what can we do to kind of still offer the same capabilities, but support the nurses in that whole channel. Mm-hmm. So in a matter of days, I think 3 or 4 days, they basically put an automation front end to do like a symptom checker and basically handle kind of the 80/20 of inquiries, and then make sure that they could still get to that human assisted or specialist assisted in the case of a nurse. So they use technology. They used in case our chatbot that we call a virtual agent, and they were able to kind of address a pain point, and just that whole ethos of well, something, we need to fix something. Let's
Get it
not mess
done.
around. Let's just do it.
Yeah, nice, like it. Michael, that's all I have. And so, unless there's anything else you'd like to add, we'll call it quits, I guess.
No, just want to thank you for the opportunity. Really enjoyed the conversation and enjoy your podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I mean, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast and to learn about the messy middle, and also about some of the firms that are responding to this, and just the broader kind of conversation. And so, yeah, just wanted to say thank you for sharing your time and your experience with us. That's been awesome.
My pleasure.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.